It always starts with silence, an unsettling kind like the hush before a thunderstorm breaks loose across the sky. You can't explain it, but your spirit catches the shift. The world seems unchanged, but something in the air feels alerted. And if you're still enough, if your heart's posture is open, you might hear it. Not a sound in the way we hear human voices, but a stirring, a whisper deep within that doesn't come from your own thoughts. That's how he speaks. Michael, the Archangel of Heaven's army. He doesn't always shout, sometimes he just whispers when something's about to happen. And if you're listening, you'll know. You don't have to be a prophet or a preacher to recognize it. No halo over your head, no lightning bolts from the clouds. What you do need is sensitivity, the kind that grows when you walk closely with God and pay attention to the invisible. Heaven doesn't broadcast in obvious ways. It's subtle, intentional, and quiet. And Michael, he's one of the most deliberate messengers. He comes when the stakes are high, not for every minor decision or daily bump in the road. He appears when the crossroads ahead could alter your destiny, when something spiritual is forming before it shows up in the natural. Sometimes you'll dream of a man in light, armored and calm, standing near the edge of your vision. Other times, it'll be a flash in your spirit, the name Michael repeated in your thoughts for no reason. It's not coincidence. It's signal, and it's time to pay attention. I remember the first time I noticed his whisper. I was standing in line at a coffee shop, half awake and scrolling through emails, when a sudden tightness wrapped around my chest. Not pain, just pressure, like someone gently pressing their hand over my heart. Then came this clear thought. Call your mother. It made no sense in the moment. We had spoken the day before, nothing urgent. But I obeyed. I stepped outside, dialed her number, and found her sobbing quietly. She had just received bad news about her health and didn't want to burden me. She had prayed right there in her kitchen, God, please send someone to check on me. And he did, through a whisper, carried by one of heaven's strongest warriors. That's when I started paying closer attention. It wasn't about dramatics, it was about divine timing. Michael's whispers never come to stir fear. They come to prepare you. And you'll know it's him when what you feel is a mix of urgency and peace. It's like being told to grab your coat because the storm is coming. Not to panic, but to get ready. That's his way. You may have already heard him and didn't realize it. Ever been in a situation where you had a gut feeling not to go somewhere or to take a different route home, and then found out something dangerous happened where you were headed? That's not just instinct. That's divine intelligence, often carried by angels assigned to guard and guide. Michael's voice may sound like your own thoughts, but when it's him, it cuts through the noise. It doesn't ask. It prompts. And it always lines up with peace, truth, and protection. The problem is we've trained ourselves to ignore whispers. We live in a culture of volume. Everything has to be loud to be heard. So when heaven speaks softly, we often miss it. But Michael doesn't raise his voice to compete with our distractions. He waits. And if we don't lean in, we'll walk right past a moment that was meant to change our lives. Sometimes the whisper comes in a word that keeps repeating itself in your mind. Not an obsessive thought, but a gentle tapping that won't go away. You could be washing dishes and suddenly the word move enters your heart. Not a sentence, just one word. And it echoes until you sit down and ask, God, what are you trying to tell me? That's often when Michael is near. He delivers messages that are brief, precise, and heavy with purpose. Other times it's a visual, a flash of light when you're praying, or the sense that someone is standing guard in the room though you're physically alone. You may even feel heat, not like fever, but a warmth around your shoulders or down your spine. I know that sounds strange, but heaven's presence manifests in ways that earthly language fails to describe. Michael doesn't come with trumpet blasts. He comes with intent. If you're on the edge of a breakthrough or about to face spiritual warfare, he'll make sure you're not blindsided. His role is defense and direction. Some people ask me, how do I know it's not just my imagination? And I always say, fruit, what comes from the whisper, peace or panic, clarity or confusion? The Holy Spirit never breeds fear. Even when Michael comes with a warning, it always ends with, you'll be okay. Just stay close to God. If what you're sensing pushes you toward righteousness, prayer, and alertness, you can trust that heaven's hand is in it. I've learned that when I start feeling unsettled for no clear reason, when I can't shake a sense of urgency but don't know why, it's not time to panic, it's time to listen. That's usually the beginning of a whisper. And when Michael whispers, it means something is shifting behind the curtain of this world. You may not see it yet, but something is being moved into place, either for your protection or preparation. And when you respond in obedience, you align yourself with what heaven already knows is coming. So I started testing the whispers, not in a way that challenged God, but in a way that honored him, asking for confirmation, seeking clarity in prayer, pausing long enough to see if what I felt carried the fingerprints of heaven. And over time a pattern emerged. Every time I leaned into that still, subtle nudge, something good unfolded. Sometimes it was the avoidance of disaster. Other times it was walking right into a divine appointment I never saw coming. There was a night, not long after I had committed to truly listening, when I was about to sign a business contract that looked like a no-brainer. Everything checked out. The numbers made sense, the people seemed trustworthy, and it felt like a natural next step. But just hours before the meeting, I had a dream. In it, I saw a hand slam a door shut and the words, "Not this way," written across the wall in bold light. I woke up covered in sweat. I didn't need a second dream to understand. I walked into that boardroom and, with a trembling voice, said, "I can't move forward with this." They looked stunned. A few months later, it came to light that the entire deal was a scam. Michael doesn't just whisper warnings, he whispers redirection. And it's not always about danger. Sometimes it's about timing. Sometimes what you want is good, but it's not God's will yet. And if you ignore that inner nudge, because everything on paper looks perfect, you'll find yourself stuck in something heaven never authorized. That's why his whisper matters. He's not just saving you from something. He's guiding you towards something better. You don't have to be in danger to hear from Michael. You just have to be near a moment that matters. He often shows up. When transition is close, when a relationship is shifting, when a job offer carries deeper implications, when you're about to speak words that have weight. That's when you feel that pressure on your spirit. Not a burden, but a pause. A spiritual hand on your shoulder, that's him, whispering, "Wait," or maybe, "Go now." Always timely, always precise. And here's the thing, they're not just messages to you. Sometimes Michael's whisper is about someone else. God doesn't just work for your protection. He uses you to protect others too. There was a woman I barely knew, a co-worker from another department. One day, during lunch, I kept hearing her name in my heart. At first I thought nothing of it. Then it came again, like a bell ringing inside me. I took a deep breath, walked to her desk, and simply said, "I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I'm supposed to tell you. You're not alone. God sees you." She burst into tears. She had been planning to end her life that evening. Her cry to God had been simple: "If you're real, send someone." And he did, through a whisper. Through Michael. The more I listened, the more I realized heaven is so much closer than we think. We walk through our days assuming the spiritual realm is somewhere else, some far-off dimension we'll get to someday, but it's layered over our reality, woven into the very air we breathe. Angels don't live in clouds, they move among us unseen but never absent. And Michael, when he whispers, it's like a breeze from another world brushing past your soul. He's not here to make a scene. He's here to serve the purposes of God in your life. And while you may never see him with your physical eyes, you'll feel him. In moments when your senses sharpen and your thoughts grow still. In times when you're standing in a crowded room but feel like someone is standing right beside you, watching out for you. In those seconds when you turn your head as if someone called your name but no one's there, that's the whisper. Of course, you can choose to ignore it. You can shrug it off and say it's just a feeling. But if you do that too often, your spiritual ears grow dull. Heaven never stops speaking, but we stop listening. That's how people miss their moment. That's how doors close and opportunities pass and tragedies unfold that could have been avoided, because the whisper came and no one heard it. But if you tune your heart to it, if you create space in your day for stillness and prayer, you'll begin to catch those moments more frequently. You'll start to sense the difference between your own emotions and divine promptings. You'll learn to respond even when you don't understand, because trust doesn't need all the details. It just needs obedience. And when you act on those whispers, you'll notice your life starts to shift. You'll be in the right place at the right time. You'll dodge spiritual attacks without even realizing they were headed your way. You'll walk into rooms that feel like they were waiting for you. That's what happens when you align yourself with heaven's rhythm. Michael doesn't show up to impress you. He shows up to position you. I can't count how many times I've felt him near right before a major decision or during seasons of grief when the weight of sorrow was too much for me to carry. And somehow, in the middle of tears, I'd feel that whisper say, "Keep going, you're not alone." Not with fanfare, not with fireworks. Just that sacred, silent assurance that heaven knows where you are and has sent backup. And listen. Sometimes, Michael doesn't even say anything. Sometimes his whisper is simply presence. You won't hear words, you'll just know. A calm in your spirit when there should be chaos. A quiet boldness in a situation where fear normally wins. That's him too. He doesn't need to speak when his nearness says it all. He stands beside you when you're walking into things bigger than you. And that's how you know something's about to happen. And that calm I mentioned, it's not like the world's version of peace. It's not just relaxation or comfort. It's divine certainty in the middle of confusion. That's how you know the whisper came from heaven. Because everything around you can be swirling, everything inside you could be screaming, but suddenly, there's this stillness. It doesn't make sense to the mind, but your spirit understands Michael is near. It happened again not long ago. I was walking into a hospital room. Someone I loved was dying. The doctors had done all they could. The machines were still beeping and the fluorescent lights were buzzing, but I felt like I stepped into holy ground. There was no voice, no announcement from the skies, but the atmosphere changed. It was as if the air itself grew heavy with reverence. I looked around, and for a moment it felt like I wasn't alone in the room. I've learned to recognize that weight, not as a burden but as a signal. Angels don't always bring action. Sometimes they bring awareness. They draw your attention to what matters. And in that moment, it wasn't about panic or grief. It was about honoring what God was doing in the unseen. Michael didn't come to prevent death that day. He came to usher peace into it. He whispered to my soul, "This is not the end. God is still here." That's what's so different about Michael's presence. It redefines what's happening around you. Where others feel fear, you feel courage. Where others feel alone, you feel held. That's why his whisper is so vital. It doesn't just warn, it reframes reality. And yet you can't chase the whisper through emotion. You can't force it to come. It's not about intensity. It's about receptivity. If your life is too loud, if your soul is cluttered with chaos, distraction, bitterness, busyness, you won't hear it. Not because he's not whispering, but because there's no room to receive it. I had to learn that the hard way. There was a season when everything was urgent. I was always rushing, always multitasking, saying quick prayers while driving, checking emails during worship. And I wondered why I couldn't sense God the way I used to, why I didn't feel guided anymore. It wasn't that heaven went silent, it was that I drowned it out. When I finally slowed down, when I started waking up early again just to sit in silence, that's when the whisper returned. At first it was faint. Then it grew clearer. And what shocked me most was how much I had missed while running so fast. I saw how many detours I had taken, how many blessings I had delayed, simply because I couldn't be still long enough to hear. Michael's whisper doesn't fight for space. It waits for stillness. It requires humility, the kind that says, I don't want to move forward without you, Lord. That's when heaven speaks. That's when your spiritual ears start to open. And once you hear it consistently, you won't want to move without it. It's like GPS for your soul. It gives you direction before the danger shows up. It gives you green lights when your own courage says, wait. It strengthens your spine when you feel like caving in, and it always, always pulls you closer to God's will. Now don't misunderstand. Not every whisper feels dramatic. Sometimes it's as soft as a name that pops into your mind out of nowhere, or a sudden urge to check on someone, or a thought you can't shake even though it doesn't seem urgent. That's how heaven hides messages in the mundane. There was a time I kept seeing the same Bible verse everywhere, on social media, in a sermon, even on a coffee mug someone handed me. At first I brushed it off, but then I realized Michael was drawing my attention to something God was about to highlight in my life. That verse became the very foundation I stood on during a trial I didn't know was coming. Heaven speaks in layers. And the more you obey, the more you'll understand. That's what people miss. It's not just about hearing, it's about responding, because response creates relationship. Obedience is what tunes you in deeper. Every time you say yes to a whisper, you get more clarity next time. Every time you follow, the volume turns up. Michael isn't speaking just to inform you. He's here to transform you. And those whispers, over time, shape your spiritual reflexes. They teach you to trust when you don't see, to wait when you want to run, to speak when you'd rather stay silent. He molds you into someone heaven can move through without resistance. But this only works if you're willing to surrender control. Because the whisper won't always align with logic. It won't always make people around you comfortable. Sometimes you'll have to walk away from things that look perfect. Sometimes you'll have to speak up in moments that feel inconvenient. That's when you'll want to hesitate. That's when the enemy will try to convince you that you're imagining things, but deep down you'll know. That's the beauty of Michael's whisper. It bypasses fear and speaks straight to the spirit. You won't always be able to explain it, but you'll feel it in your bones, and when you act on it, you'll see the evidence unfold. You'll step into divine timing that no human effort could have arranged. That's when you realize this isn't about mystical experiences. It's about divine partnership. Heaven isn't just watching you, it's walking with you. And Michael, as God's warrior messenger, is one of the ones leading the way. Quietly, strategically, faithfully, he doesn't need applause. He doesn't need credit. He just needs you to listen. And the moment you choose to listen, everything begins to change. You might not feel it right away, but there's a shift in the atmosphere, in your spirit, in the way heaven interacts with you. It's subtle but steady. A sacred alignment begins to form between your life and God's plan. Michael doesn't shout it. He just nudges it into place, piece by piece. I remember one night I couldn't sleep. Nothing was wrong on the surface, no big crisis, no pressing issue, but I felt this restless stirring in my chest. I tried praying, journaling, even pacing around the house, but the feeling didn't leave. So finally, I got quiet. I sat in the dark and whispered, "What is it, Lord?" And I heard it, not audibly but clearly in my spirit. "Call your brother." It didn't make sense. It was late. We hadn't spoken in weeks. There wasn't any drama between us, just life and distance. But the whisper wouldn't leave, so I picked up the phone. When he answered, his voice cracked. He'd been crying. He told me he had just asked God, "If you're real, have someone call me right now." That whisper, that was Michael, moving in real time. Responding to a prayer I didn't even know existed. That's the kind of alignment heaven operates in. That's why you can't ignore the still small voice, because sometimes your obedience is the answer to someone else's cry, and that's where things get deeper. Michael's whispers don't just prepare you, they position you, not for your comfort but for kingdom impact. He might wake you up in the middle of the night to intercede for someone you haven't thought about in years. He might ask you to give something away when your own resources are tight. But there's always a purpose behind it. The more you obey, the more he trusts you with. It's like training. Michael doesn't just protect, he equips. He sharpens your spirit to recognize battle lines before they form. He teaches you to sense spiritual danger before it reaches your doorstep. And when the time comes, he strengthens your hands to fight, not with fists but with faith. I've seen this kind of whisper stop a person from walking into disaster. I've seen it pull someone off a destructive path, reveal hidden motives. In relationships, bring exposure before betrayal could do more damage. And often no one even knows what happened, but you know. Because that whisper warned you. It saved you. And it drew you closer to the one who sends the warning in the first place. But let me be real. This kind of listening life will set you apart. It's not trendy, it's not comfortable, it's not even always celebrated. People might think you're too intense, too spiritual, too deep. They'll say you're reading too much into things, that you're overthinking. But what they don't see is what you've been saved from. What they don't hear is the whisper that's guided your steps like a lamp in the fog. There was a time I almost signed a contract that looked like a dream on paper. The money, the platform, the opportunity. It all screamed, yes. But the moment I sat down to sign, I felt it. A quiet, unmistakable no, not from fear, not from self-doubt. Just a heavy sense that something wasn't right. I walked away. Months later, everything connected to that project collapsed in scandal. If I had ignored that whisper, I would have gone down with it. Michael doesn't whisper because you're weak. He whispers because you're valuable. You carry weight in the spiritual realm, even if you don't always see it. And heaven's not about to let you walk blindly into traps just because they're wrapped in shiny packaging. Sometimes his whispers come through dreams, vivid, strange, layered with symbolism. Sometimes they come through sudden instincts, or even through other people's warnings. The method isn't what matters, the obedience is. You don't need to decode every detail to respond. You just need to stay sensitive, because one whisper can reroute your entire life. One divine nudge can change your legacy. The smallest yes can open a floodgate of favor you never saw coming. And here's what I've learned. The more you honor the whisper, the louder heaven speaks. You won't just wait for signs, you'll become a sign. A walking, breathing demonstration that God still communicates, that angels are still on assignment, that Michael still whispers when something's about to shift. And if you're wondering how to know it's him, how to discern the difference between your thoughts, your fears, and the whisper, it always comes back to peace and alignment. Michael doesn't bring confusion. He doesn't create chaos. He confirms God's character. He draws you back to holiness. If what you're sensing stirs humility, reverence, and clarity, pay attention. You're probably not imagining it, but if it leaves you anxious, frantic, or self-centered, pause. Pray. Ask the Holy Spirit to filter the noise. Michael may be whispering, but discernment keeps you from misinterpreting divine signals. This is why a life of listening must also be a life of intimacy with God. You can't just seek the whisper. You must stay close to the one who sends it. Because, ultimately, The goal isn't just to hear Michael's voice, it's to follow God's heart. And once you've made peace with the truth that it's God's heart you're following, not your comfort, not your timing, not even your own dreams, you'll start seeing how Michael's whispers were never meant to merely inform you. They were designed to transform you, because transformation doesn't happen in loud, obvious moments. It happens in the quiet. In the space between the whisper and your response, that's where your character is refined. That's where your discernment sharpens. That's where heaven starts trusting you with things that carry eternal weight. You. See, when Archangel Michael speaks, he's not just pointing you to a change, he's preparing you for one. And preparation always precedes promotion in the kingdom. That's why it often feels like the whisper asks more of you than you think you're ready to give. But that's the thing. Michael isn't calling out your qualifications. He's calling out your obedience. I think about Abraham sometimes. How he got a whisper, a nudge. Leave your country, go to the land I will show you. No detailed itinerary, no backup plan. Just a whisper and a command. And yet, his obedience birthed a nation. He didn't argue with the whisper. He walked with it. How often do we hear God's prompting through Michael and stall because we want all the answers first? We want confirmation after confirmation. We want it to make sense. We want guarantees. But faith doesn't come with blueprints. It comes with trust. And when you trust, you'll start recognizing patterns in Michael's whispers. You'll notice how they show up when your spirit starts feeling unsettled. When the door looks perfect, but something in you says, not yet. When you meet someone new and can't shake the unease, even though they check every box. That whisper is heaven flagging something your eyes can't see yet. And the more you ignore it, the more you risk stepping into something that looks like a blessing, but was actually a setup. I once knew a woman who was about to marry a man everyone loved. On the outside, he was a dream, charming, successful, even active in ministry. But every time she prayed, she heard nothing but silence. And that silence became deafening. One day she asked God, "Why won't you speak to me about this?" And what came into her spirit was clear. "I already did. You just didn't want to hear it." Michael had been whispering all along, in small hesitations, delayed peace, even gentle red flags. But when you want something badly enough, you'll silence the whisper just to justify the decision. That's the danger. You can train yourself to ignore divine nudges if you're more loyal to your desires than to God's direction. But thankfully, Michael doesn't give up that easily. Even when we miss it, he circles back. He alerts. He protects. I've seen situations where people walked straight into storms they were warned about, yet grace still covered them. Why? Because God's mercy runs deeper than our mistakes. But wouldn't it be better to avoid the storm altogether? That's why this matters. This whispering isn't mystical or weird. It's protective. It's personal. It's proof that God doesn't leave his children blind. Michael's assignment isn't just to war, it's to warn. And those warnings, they're acts of love. There was a time I was planning a big move across the country. Everything lined up. I had the job, the apartment, the connections. But in prayer, I felt this strange pressure in my chest every time I imagined leaving. Not fear, more like a divine restraint. Like heaven saying, "Not yet." I almost ignored it. Almost convinced myself I was just nervous. But I waited. 3 weeks later, the company that offered me the job went bankrupt. The entire branch shut down. I would have been stuck, alone, jobless, thousands of miles from any support system. That whisper, that holy restraint, that was Michael. Heaven doesn't just open doors, it closes the wrong ones too. And sometimes that closed door is the clearest whisper of all. But here's the thing. You've got to be emotionally and spiritually healthy enough to receive the whisper without offense. If you only want a yes from God, you'll miss his best. Michael doesn't show up to flatter your plans. He shows up to align them, So when he whispers pause, pause. When he whispers move, move. When he whispers no, trust that what's behind that no might have broken you. It's not punishment, it's preservation. And don't expect the whisper to come through spectacular signs. Yes, sometimes dreams, visions, or prophetic words will confirm what Michael's saying, but more often, it's the inner knowing, the conviction that won't lift, the word that keeps repeating in your spirit, the strange coincidence that feels too precise to be random. That's him. That's heaven working behind the scenes, and if you've missed a whisper before, don't sit in shame. Don't spiral into regret. Just repent, realign, and listen again. God is not looking for perfect record keepers. He's looking for willing vessels, available hearts, people who say, Lord, even if I missed you yesterday, I'm tuned in today. Michael responds to that. He honors your humility, because every great move of God starts with someone who dares to listen again. So now the question becomes, what has Michael been whispering to you that you've been too distracted, too afraid, or too proud to hear? Because if you're honest with yourself, you felt it, that low hum in your spirit, that nudge that doesn't go away no matter how much you try to rationalize it. You might have chalked it up to your imagination or stress, but deep down, you knew something more was happening. You just didn't want to admit it, because if you did, it meant change, it meant obedience. It meant letting go of the plan you carefully crafted and stepping into the one God wrote for you. Michael's whispers often begin with discomfort. Not panic, holy discomfort, like heaven pressing pause on something you were ready to fast forward through. It shows up in relationships, jobs, moves, friendships. Everything can look perfect on paper, but there's a tension in your spirit that you can't shake. That tension, that's usually Michael standing between you and a counterfeit. Blessing, and listen, counterfeits don't look evil. That's what makes them so dangerous. They look almost right. Just enough truth to keep you interested, just enough peace to keep you from praying harder. But if you lean in, if you get quiet, you'll notice the difference. Because real peace doesn't flicker in the dark. It stands. It holds steady even when the wind picks up. The counterfeit will always require you to silence God to keep your fantasy alive. But the real thing? The real path? It comes with whispers of confirmation that stack like bricks under your feet. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's clear. Michael won't always hand you the full vision, but he will give you the next step. And sometimes that's all you need. That one whisper is enough to shift you from confusion to conviction. One small act of obedience can unlock the momentum of heaven, but you've got to move when he speaks. I've watched people hear the whisper and freeze, waiting for everything to make perfect sense. And while they sat still, doors closed, opportunities faded, relationships withered. Not because God was punishing them, but because they didn't. Move when the Spirit stirred. Don't let fear be louder than the whisper. Don't let logic override your faith. You were never meant to follow Jesus with a spreadsheet and a fallback plan. You were meant to follow him with a sword in one hand and trust in the other. Michael isn't whispering because he's unsure. He's whispering because you're being invited into sacred intimacy. You don't shout secrets, you whisper them. That's how God operates with his favorites. And yes, you can be one of them, but you've got to learn the language of heaven. That means less reacting and more responding, less impulsiveness and more prayer, less asking why and more asking what now. Michael doesn't have time to explain every battle you're being saved from. But if you trust the whisper, you'll walk past traps you didn't even know were set. There was a time I was offered a speaking engagement at a massive event. It was the kind of opportunity I used to dream about. Huge audience, top-tier platform, all expenses paid. But as I prayed, I felt this weight. Not excitement, not fear, just a heaviness. Like the Spirit was saying, "Don't go." Everything in me wanted to say yes, but I declined. A month later, The event made headlines. Hidden scandals, financial, corruption, leadership exposed. If I had gone, my name would have been tied to that mess. One whisper saved me years of damage control. That's what Michael does. He doesn't just fight, he filters. He clears your path before the war even starts. And here's what's wild: sometimes Michael whispers not because danger is near, but because destiny is. He starts preparing you months in advance. You might not even understand why you're being drawn to pray more, fast more, isolate more. But he knows what's coming. He knows what you need to carry the next mantle. And he's trying to get you ready. I once met a young woman who told me she started waking up at 3 a.m. every day for no reason. At first she thought it was insomnia, but soon she began to feel the pull to pray. She didn't even know what to pray for, so she just sat there in silence. A month later, her family was hit with a crisis that would have shattered them if she hadn't been spiritually prepared. The prayers she didn't even understand had already paved the road for breakthrough. That's the power of the whisper. It's not always a warning, it's often a preparation. And if you only tune in when things are going wrong, you'll miss the whispers that come to build you before the battle ever shows up. So ask yourself, what has God been gently nudging you toward? What habits has He been whispering for you to break? What relationships has He been cautioning you about? What quiet dreams have you buried because they didn't seem logical? Michael doesn't speak just to fill the silence. He speaks to shift it. And sometimes his whisper is simply this: stay close. That's it. No big instruction, just proximity. Because some seasons aren't about strategy, they're about presence. And when you stay close to God, you don't have to force anything. You won't miss the timing. You won't miss the opportunity. You won't miss the whisper. Because what's meant for you, whispered from heaven, will always find you if your heart is listening. And that's the thing about listening. You don't just do it with your ears. You do it with your life, with how you walk, how you wait, how you worship. Because if you've really heard the whisper, something in you changes. You stop rushing. You stop striving. You stop chasing validation in places God never sent you. You begin to walk slower, but with more power. And that's when you start to notice the chaos around you doesn't shake you the way it used to. You're no longer reacting out of fear, but responding out of discernment. That's the effect of walking under the whispers of Archangel Michael. Your life becomes an echo of heaven's rhythm, and sometimes the whisper will lead you away from the crowd. It'll pull you out of group chats, out of busy schedules, out of people's approval, not because you're being punished, but because God wants to be heard clearly, and you can't hear the whisper if you're drowning in noise. Solitude. Care's often the training ground for clarity. Look at Moses, look at Elijah, look at Jesus. They all withdrew before major moves of God, not because they were retreating, but because they were tuning in. So if you feel like God's pulling you away from people, don't panic. Don't assume something's wrong. Sometimes Michael whispers, come away because something holy is coming toward you and you need room for it. This is where many people miss it. They interpret separation as rejection instead of redirection. But heaven never subtracts without the intent to multiply. If God is closing a door, removing a person, or drying up a platform, it's because what's ahead requires it. Michael doesn't just whisper to warn, he whispers to reorder, to rearrange the landscape of your life so what God wants to pour in won't leak out. That's why he starts prompting you to change little things, the way you speak, the way you spend your time, the way you handle pressure, because what's coming won't fit inside the old version of you. That's something people don't talk about enough, how the whisper doesn't just show up in big moments, but in the mundane. You'll hear it when you're washing dishes and suddenly feel prompted to intercede for someone. You'll hear it when you're walking into a meeting and sense that today's not the day to pitch your idea. You'll feel it when you're scrolling and get a sudden urge to shut your phone and pray. Heaven's whispers are woven into your day, not just reserved for altars and services. Michael shows up in the stillness because the stillness reveals what the noise hides. And when you respond to those small nudges, heaven takes note. Obedience in the little makes room for promotion in the big. I remember hearing a story about a man who felt a sudden urge to walk into a hospital chapel one afternoon. He wasn't religious, didn't even know why he was there. But he walked. In sat down, and moments later a young woman walked in weeping. She had just received devastating news and was crying out for someone, anyone, to sit with her. That man ended up praying with her. A stranger, guided only by a whisper. That's the power of divine alignment. You never know who's on the other side of your obedience. One whisper followed can become someone else's miracle, so don't take it lightly when you feel stirred to text someone out of the blue. Don't ignore that sudden pull to pray for a name that popped into your mind. Don't dismiss the feeling that today is not the day to push forward. Michael isn't whispering to entertain you, he's activating you. And here's something else. The more you obey, the louder the whisper becomes. Not because Michael changes, but because you do. Your spiritual senses get sharper. Your peace gets louder. You begin to recognize heaven's fingerprints in places you never noticed before. Before long, you're not asking God to speak. You're recognizing that He already is. It's like tuning a radio. At first you get static. You question if it's really God or just your thoughts. But as you keep practicing, the frequency clears. The static fades. And suddenly you're not guessing anymore, you know. But to get there, you've got to treat the whisper as sacred, which means you can't keep dismissing it because it's inconvenient. You can't keep asking God for confirmation when He's already spoken. Sometimes the real faith is in taking the first step while you're still unsure. Michael whispers, because he trusts that you're growing into someone who will move not when it's easy, but when it's right. And when you move like that, you become dangerous to the enemy. Because now you're not reacting to life, you're being led. And people who are led by heaven's whispers don't fall for every trap. They don't run through every open door. They don't attach to every opportunity. They discern. So what's God whispering to you right now? What has He been saying over and over in different ways, hoping you'll finally pause and listen? Maybe it's something you've buried because it scares you. Maybe it's something you've ignored because it stretches you. Maybe it's something you've heard but haven't had the courage to act on. Here's the truth. Heaven doesn't whisper in vain. If Michael is speaking, it's because heaven is planning. So instead of asking for another sign, maybe it's time to obey the one you already have. And when you finally decide to act on what you heard, that soft prompting, that holy tug, you'll notice something else. Resistance. Not always from the enemy first, but sometimes from the people around you. Friends who don't understand. Family who questions your logic. Co-workers who think you've lost your mind. And if you're not grounded in the whisper, you'll start to second-guess everything. But here's what Archangel Michael wants you to understand. When heaven calls you to something, it will rarely make sense to those who weren't in the room when God whispered it. They didn't feel the fire that stirred in your spirit. They didn't cry the tears you cried in the middle of the night. They didn't see the vision that interrupted your ordinary life. So don't expect people who walk by sight to understand the journey of someone walking by faith. Obedience is lonely at first. You may have to leave some things behind. Comfort, applause, predictability. But what you gain is so much more powerful. Alignment. You begin to move in sync with heaven's timing. You begin to notice divine appointments, supernatural provision, and unexplained peace. And that's when you know you're no longer just surviving life, you're walking in purpose. And purpose doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it looks like quitting the job that everyone thinks is perfect for you. Sometimes it looks like staying when everyone else says go. Sometimes it looks like showing up again and again, with no visible reward, just because God whispered, "Don't stop." Michael doesn't lead you to convenience. He leads you to calling. And calling will stretch you, but it will also refine you. It will burn off the fake, the fear, the fluff. What's left? Someone who knows how to stand when everything around them says run. That's the kind of person Michael can use in battle. Not the loudest, not the most talented, but the most willing. The one who moves when heaven speaks, even if it doesn't make sense yet. I knew a woman once who had a dream that she needed to forgive her estranged father. She hadn't spoken to him in years. The pain was deep, justified, and old, but the dream kept coming back. Whisper after whisper. She finally surrendered, traveled hours to find him. When she arrived, he was on his deathbed. She got to pray with him, forgive him, and hold his hand as he passed. That moment set her free in ways therapy couldn't touch. Whisper shifted generations of pain. This is why it's dangerous to delay obedience. The window doesn't stay open forever. God is gracious, yes, but He's also strategic. He works within divine timing. And when the moment is ripe, you have to move. Delay can cost you more than you realize. Not just the opportunity, but the peace, the alignment, the transformation that comes with walking in sync with God. Michael doesn't whisper endlessly. He whispers urgently, with precision, with heaven's blueprint in hand. And those whispers? They're often time-sensitive. Have you ever felt that? Like if you don't act now, you'll miss something. That's not pressure. That's prompting. That's heaven signaling a shift. It's not to scare you, it's to prepare you, to position you so you don't miss what's coming next. And here's the beauty of it all. When you act on the whisper, no matter how small the step, heaven backs you. Things align, people show up, provision falls into place. You realize God had already arranged everything, you just had to show up. Michael doesn't expect you to have all the answers. He expects you to trust. And if you can do that, if you can lean into the whisper and take the step even when your knees are shaking, you'll start to live a life that feels supernatural. Because it is. You'll start to recognize divine fingerprints on your day-to-day. You'll begin to hear heaven's rhythm even in the silence. And suddenly, your prayers aren't just cries for help. They're confirmations of direction. Michael's voice doesn't always sound like thunder. Sometimes it's the smallest shift in your spirit. The gut feeling, the gentle pause, the quickening in your heart when you're about to speak or move. It's subtle, sacred, and if you've trained your ear, you'll catch it. But if your life is too loud, you'll miss it. So maybe the whisper isn't the problem. Maybe the volume of your distractions is. Ask yourself, when's the last time you sat in silence long enough to hear? Not pray, not vent, not beg. Just listen. Because often Michael's whispers are waiting on the other side of your stillness. And if you're wondering where to start, begin with this. Lord, I'm listening, even if it's inconvenient. Even if it disrupts my plan. Speak, I'll obey. That's the kind of posture heaven can't ignore. That's when the whisper becomes a wind. And when the wind of heaven moves, nothing stays the same. And by the time that wind begins to stir, you'll feel it before you see it. That's how heaven works. Internal confirmation often comes long before external manifestation. You might not have the job offer yet. You might not see the healing. The door may still be shut. But in your spirit, something has shifted. It's the calm before breakthrough. It's the whisper that tells you, get ready, something's coming. Michael's whisper is often that still voice preparing your soul while everything around you looks the same. It's a preparation so deep that by the time the moment arrives, you're not surprised, you're steady. Not caught off guard, but rooted. That's the thing about listening long enough. It doesn't make the journey easier, but it does make you unshakable. And the enemy? He hates that. He hates when you walk in clarity. Because a person with clarity is dangerous. They don't flinch at distractions. They don't entertain drama. They don't chase what isn't theirs. They wait, and when it's time to move, they do, with authority. Michael's whisper carries that kind of weight. Not the kind that shouts over your life, but the kind that pierces deep into your identity and says, "You were made for this, and maybe you needed to hear that today." Because the whispers aren't just about what's coming, they're also about who you're becoming. Heaven speaks because heaven sees the real you, the version not yet revealed, the strength not yet tapped, the purpose not yet fulfilled. And when you lean in, you start to agree with heaven's view of you, not the world's. That's how you know Michael has been near. Your self-doubt begins to lose its grip. Your fear of the unknown no longer paralyzes you. You start to remember what God said, really remember, not just with your mind, but with your spirit. And in that remembering, you begin to walk differently. You walk like someone who's heard from God, like someone who's been marked by a divine whisper, like someone who knows their next move is covered, even if it's unclear. That's the paradox of faith, walking in confidence without knowing the outcome. People might ask, "How are you so sure?" And you'll have no evidence, just obedience. No detailed plan, just a promise. No map, just a whisper. But that's enough. Because when heaven whispers, it doesn't echo in your ears, it settles in your soul. And that soul-deep assurance is what keeps you anchored when the storm hits. Because yes, storms will come. And sometimes they'll hit right after the whisper, almost like the enemy trying to drown it out. But if the whisper came before the wind, believe the whisper. It was there first. It holds more weight than the noise. That follows. Remember when Jesus told the disciples they were going to the other side? That whisper, his word, came before the storm hit their boat. The wind and waves didn't cancel the promise. They just tested it. And Michael shows up in those moments not to remove the storm, but to remind you, you're still going where God said you would. That's what makes the whisper powerful. It doesn't erase the storm. It outlasts it. And here's what you need to know right now. If you're in a season where the noise is loud, the warfare intense, and the silence feels deafening, don't assume the whisper has stopped. Sometimes heaven goes quiet, not because it has nothing to say, but because it already told you what to do. Michael doesn't stutter. When he delivers heaven's message, it's clear. If you haven't heard anything new, go back to the last thing God said and stand on it. Obey it. Honor it. Move in it. We often chase new words because the last one feels too costly. But faith doesn't ask for options. It asks for obedience. And the beauty of obedience? It opens doors that hustle never could. The whisper leads you to divine acceleration, where things unfold faster, smoother, more beautifully than you could have orchestrated. One act of obedience can change the entire trajectory of your life. I've seen people go from overlooked to favored overnight. Not because they networked their way in, not because they forced open a door, but because they followed the whisper. They turned down the good to wait for the God-ordained. And when it showed up, they were ready. That's the kind of life Michael's whisper sets you up for. Not a life of control, but a life of trust. One that may not always make sense to others, but is filled with divine appointments, supernatural protection, and undeniable peace. So let me ask you again. What is God whispering to you? What's the step you've been afraid to take? Even though it's been nudging your spirit for months. What's the dream you buried because it scared you, but keeps coming back in your prayers and visions? What's the conversation you know you need to have? What's the boundary you need to set? The person you need to release? The place you need to leave? Heaven speaks to move you, not just inspire you. And Michael doesn't whisper without purpose. If he's been circling your spirit, nudging your heart, aligning your path, it's because something is about to shift. Your job isn't to figure it all out, it's to follow. even when it's foggy, even when it's quiet, even when it's scary, because the whisper may be soft, but the impact is always loud. And as you step into this new season, guided by the whisper, understand this: you're not alone. Michael, the great protector and warrior of heaven, walks with you every step of the way. His presence isn't just a promise, it's a powerful reality. When you listen closely, you feel it, a steadying hand on your shoulder, a shield around your heart. You'll find that the whispers continue, even when the path gets rocky. They may come in unexpected ways: a sudden peace amid chaos, a quiet word in prayer, a dream that lingers long after waking. These whispers are reminders that God's plan is unfolding, and you are part of a greater story. And that story, it's bigger than you. It's about redemption, breakthrough, and purpose. It's about God working all things together for your good, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Sometimes the whisper is a call to courage, to step out when the ground feels uncertain, to trust when your heart trembles, to believe when the world doubts. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains and calms storms. Michael's whisper is an invitation to walk boldly, not because you have all the answers, but because you trust the one who does. You don't have to see the whole staircase. You just take the first step. And remember, every whisper you follow deepens your connection with heaven. It tunes your spirit to the divine frequency. It sharpens your spiritual hearing so that even in the loudest moments, you won't lose the voice that matters most. So hold tight to the whispers. Don't ignore them. Don't silence them with noise or doubt. Let them be your guide, your courage, your compass. Because when Archangel Michael whispers, it's not just a message. It's a movement, a divine shift preparing you for what's next. And if you're listening closely enough, you'll hear the world change with you. Step forward then in faith and obedience. Let the whisper lead, and watch how heaven moves on your behalf. You're on the cusp of something incredible. And Michael, he's right there with you, whispering, guarding, guiding until the moment breaks and the promise unfolds.